Morning, Sam. How are you doing?
Good. What state are you tuning in from?
I'm in Virginia, beautiful Northern Virginia. The sun is out. The leaves are starting to, bud, or the trees are starting to bud. So spring is upon us,
Nice.
thankfully.
And are you a formal triathlete or are you still a triathlete?
I would say I'm probably a bigger triathlon fan than I am
Okay.
a triathlete these days, but I do try to get into the local triathlon here or there in town. With a couple
Nice.
of small kids, it's harder to carve out
Yeah,
the extensive time to do the longer ones, a half or a full, but that is on my roadmap at some stage of the game.
it's a great sport for compulsive behavior.
I only wish that the swimming component was a longer
Oh,
piece of the
oh,
overall puzzle. Having spent 20 plus years swimming all up through college,
no kidding.
it would be nice to to let those strengths shine. But that's how it goes sometimes.
What were your strokes?
I was a distance freestyler, so I
Really?
focused on the
Oh,
mile,
no
the
kidding.
1,000, the 500, and the 400 individual medley. The
Wow.
longest events you could do in the pool, that is what I did.
Without drowning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's great. I love swimming. That's same. 'Cause I'm from Florida, so captain of the swim team my senior year in high school, and then that kind of led me into triathlon as well, the cycling
Yeah.
and the running and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I grew up in Southern California and had never really swam in an indoor pool until I got to college, which was in
Wow.
Massachusetts, and so kind of needed to go indoors, but very used to the outdoor swimming, the great goggle or cap, tan lines, the whole nine yards.
That's awesome, man. Well, welcome. Appreciate you coming online. I mean, I've gotten to know you through the ConnectWise Evolve groups, which is just turned out to be like this remarkable incubator for managed service providers who'd like to grow. I'm just so impressed with the people we've met there. But I think I've seen you at a couple other conferences too. Didn't I see you in Orlando?
Yeah, yeah. I try to make the rounds at as many of
Right?
the conferences that will have me, whether it's the Evolve conferences or Kaseya or the DattoCon
Okay.
conferences. Really, any of the opportunities that I've had in the past to share a little bit of M&A related knowledge with the group, given how ubiquitous that topic is within the
Yeah.
MSP industry. Without trying to overburden individuals, because there's a lot to cover, but try to keep to the most salient points.
And you did that for 5 years with Ntiva? Is that right?
I did, yeah. At Ntiva to spearhead their M&A and integration practice for the better part of 5 years. My history kind of prior to coming to Ntiva was all around M&A and integration work at a variety of stops along the way. But the time at Ntiva in particular was a chance to bring all those different attributes of finance, integration, personal element, a bit of salesmanship, all those things together
Yeah.
into a singular role in a business and within an industry that is undergoing a lot of rapid transformation and a lot of consolidation and acquisition. So trying to do
Mm-hmm.
it in the right way, with the
Mm-hmm.
right focus and values and approach, that was tremendously important, because even with all the activity happening, reputation is tantamount, and so needed to be at the forefront of every conversation and engagement along the way.
Well, I can really appreciate that because I think we've all seen examples of where it wasn't done well. And, why be in merger and acquisition if you're just going to destroy the companies you're buying or yourself in the process? And
Right.
so I have seen a much more thoughtful approach, but investors are investors. They have high expectations, and these are not what small business owners are used to, right? So, and I'm seeing now too that most everyone, and me included, for years, we were kind of running it as a lifestyle business owner, meaning we had a certain lifestyle in mind, and then we ran a tech business and built a tech business. We wanted decent income and various
Mhm.
levels of performance. But for the most part, these guys are running lifestyle businesses. So how did you navigate through that? And then Antiva's no small organization. So over a 5 year journey, were you changing your expectations as to what you were looking for? And how did that work for you?
Yeah, so the focus from an acquisition profile perspective really didn't change so much from when I first started to most recently. It's really been about trying to find individuals who share like-minded goals, a like-minded vision to serving their clients, helping the growth and development of their team and their colleagues, and doing so in a way that really puts the unique recurring revenue engine that underpins the MSP world at the forefront. So, for however many hundreds, perhaps more companies and individuals and leaders that I've spoken with while at Ntiva, you kind of get a sense of an organization and a leader sometimes within the just those first couple of minutes, that first impression, and that can be really helpful to understanding what that business would be like or what that set of individuals would be like under the Ntiva umbrella. There's something to be said for first impressions. It's like when you're looking at colleges and you set foot on a campus and in an instant there's anything specific or clear or tangible about it. You just know that, all right, this is going to be a great spot for me, or maybe
Hmm.
this isn't. And I think being able to build that expertise in a way to judge individuals that can be tremendously important, so you can focus on building relationships with individuals that are most worthwhile to do so.
Speaking of colleges, you're a graduate of Darden School of Business, I noticed. MBA, congratulations. That's quite an achievement. How
Yeah.
did you pick Darden, or did they pick you?
Well, it's a bit of a funny story. I was spending far too many hours in the day working as an investment banker prior to moving to Charlottesville, Virginia, which, if anyone has been there, knows how wonderfully beautiful and lovely that city is, and the campus is there. I knew I wanted to have a business school experience that was fairly rigorous and case based, but also a small enough outfit whereby I could really foster and develop great relationships with my classmates, and folks who've become lifelong friends. And then I guess there was a familial aspect to it as well. My father-in-law had gone to Darden. One of my brothers-in-law had also gone to Darden. So there was a fair amount of familiarity with the school
Okay.
kind of when I was starting to look. And so once I was in and visited with my then girlfriend, now wife, I kind of knew that Charlottesville was going to be a pretty amazing spot to spend the next 2 years. And so we'll take any excuse to get back there that we can. It's only about a 2 hour drive for us, and we'll take it.
That's great. So what kind of I mean, did the education help you in this journey? And I see that you've also worked for Deloitte. You've got quite a bit of experience coming into working for Ntiva and helping them in the corporate development role. What'd you take away from that MBA and
I
some
think
of
it
these?
I think it's really just about sparking and continuing to feed the intellectual curiosity that I've had kind of right from the get go. A willingness to put myself into classes with new or different or somewhat uncomfortable subject matters, things that I'm not especially familiar with,
Hmm.
just to learn or to test
Uh-huh.
myself or recognize what I'm good at, or conversely what I'm perhaps not so good at. And I think that was tremendously helpful. Also, just the chance to meet and learn with and alongside folks who have come from a variety of different backgrounds. It wasn't
Mm.
just a sea of former investment bankers or former consultants that were coming into to school to tick the box and then go off to the next thing. You had folks who had been in the military, folks who had done marketing, folks who had done political work, fundraising. Take your pick on what they've done, and they bring perspective to the conversation that you wouldn't ordinarily experience. And so I think that was a really valuable way to spend a couple of years.
So were you in investment banking for a while as well?
I was, yeah. So I spent
Okay.
almost 5 years at Morgan Stanley prior
Right. I
to
did read that.
prior to going to Darden.
Hmm.
The last couple of years of which in the prototypical investment banking analyst role, where you literally work 100 hours a week, and you learn a tremendous amount in a very short period of time.
Mm.
I was thankful too that I worked with some great fellow analysts that all these years later, almost 20 years later, we still get together on an annual basis,
Wow.
which is really rewarding in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so
Huh.
that great foundation building from a core skill set perspective, and then it was just each step in the path has been about building the experience and the exposure and the capabilities, and kind of using that as the springboard onto the next adventure, and really trying to leverage what I've used in the past to be better at what I'm doing in the current moment.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. So how did you end up at Ntiva? I mean, is this something you suspected? Like, were you curious with technology? There's so many different areas of the industry. How did you end up there?
Yeah, so I think the best way to explain it is to take it a step prior to Ntiva, or maybe two actually. When I was at Deloitte there for about 5 or 6 years, focused on serving very large businesses on integration and divestiture efforts. And I was reaching a point in my career where I was curious to find a role where I could bring different facets of my experience together into a singular role. And I was approached to join a business in the telecom software space called TOMIA that was backed by a very large private equity firm, Vista Equity Partners, and they were looking to stand up an integration engine within that business, having recently been acquired. And so I joined there. The trouble with that business, or why I only ended up there for just under 2 years before joining Ntiva, is they had undertaken a very large acquisition just prior to me joining, and underwent a lot of challenges dealing with operational issues, cultural mismatch between the two organizations, and it precluded their ability to do subsequent acquisitions,
Wow.
despite my best efforts in pipeline building and
Right.
relationship building and the like. And so at that point in time, I was actually recruited to join Ntiva and joined them in late 2020. As folks were kind of getting back onto the horse, after realizing, hey, we can do business, we can do deals in a remote environment in the early months of COVID, and joined them, and immediately started doing acquisitions. The MSP space was new to me at that point in time, but just coming from the functional background, the functional expertise that I had on the M&A and corporate development side of things, I was able to learn up the industry quickly and kind of grow and build from there.
That's cool, man. Wow. So it sounds like you saw a lot too, both before and after joining Ntiva. So you're no longer at Ntiva. We'll let you talk about that in just a few minutes. With the quarterly Evolve meetings, we're coming up here in May. We'll be in
Mhm.
Chicago, and the IT Nation Grow meets on Community Day in between the two groups. That's how I've gotten to know you and several other guys that are doing corporate development for some of the big MSPs. And they have a different focus now. They're getting just continue to get more and more organized. I'm so impressed with anybody who's engaged in Evolve. This quarter, the focus is going to be on value, adding value. And it's interesting. Are you familiar with Linda Rose, author?
I am. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's great. Get Acquired for Millions is her book, and I'm reading it for the first time. I've known about it for 10 years. It's amazing. It's one of the most thorough compilations I've ever seen, and I'm just getting into it. And
Mhm.
she's got this chapter on 8 key value maximizers. And just reading some of the titles of these are financial fitness, revenue readiness, management muscle, value proposition or verticalization, customer satisfaction and retention, sustainable success, sales and marketing, intellectual property, and presence. And the rest of her book is really written about those values. But this direction is really for the current owner, right? The current owner to build value into his business. As I read through it and wanted to prep for Evolve, there's a little bit different perspective when you're doing merger and acquisition, right? How can you add value? How can your teams add value? What are your thoughts on that? Like, if you were to be on a panel, how would you answer those questions?
Would say that those 8 value drivers that you mentioned, the pursuit of them doesn't necessarily stop when an owner has transitioned the business to be under private equity ownership or be acquired by a larger organization. I think you be a unicorn if you're able to be successful knocking them out of the park on each and every one of the 8 on the list. And I'm sure there can be others out there as well. And so I think there's a real opportunity when you partner with someone to leverage the great work and efforts that you've done on 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 of them on that list, and be able to tackle the rest of the list
Hmm.
with added support, investment, reinvigoration. And so I think that's where partnership with private equity, or becoming part of a larger organization like Ntiva, allows you to unlock the capabilities to focus on those things. Because for a lot of business owners, you're the single individual at the top of the heap. You wear half a dozen hats, maybe a dozen hats, based on what the business requires at any given moment. And so it can be a challenge to try to tackle all those things at the same time.
Hmm.
And so I think
Hmm.
if you can focus on a couple of them at any given point in time, then perhaps find someone that'll help you unlock the rest of that list.
Okay. So yeah, but so people are doing that. If they're okay, I've got to get on board. I've got to work on my financial fitness or my sales and marketing engine. As you were acquiring and helping Tiva acquire companies, how did they appreciate what the former seller or former owner had built? I mean, is it because as I've watched the big roll ups that are going on in America, there seems to be a couple of different models. One is we'll buy a bunch of companies, we'll allow them to run independently. Our cumulative valuation will increase, but we won't fully integrate, or there's some integration, but not full integration. Whereas the organizations that were doing full integration, it seems that it needs to be a more aggressive operational focus. And I can see how maybe some potentially maybe more sparks are flying or personalities or a sense, maybe the seller has a sense of loss that I'm losing some of the things I've built. So the acquirer has to be really good at getting those teams working well together. At least I have found that that's one of our synergies, one of our sweet spots, one of our strengths, but it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of patience. So how do you see that playing itself out?
I think where you can be most successful in that effort and trying to combat the potential risk around a seller feeling a loss of identity is through the course of conversations, relationship building, rapport developing, trust building between a potential seller and a likely buyer. It's really about trying to highlight that which makes that seller and that seller organization special, and talking about how the go forward organization, the larger business, can continue to highlight, support, develop, grow that special capability. Whether it's a unique way in which service is delivered to clients, or a expertise within a particular industry vertical, or other capabilities, training and development of staff, to be able to continue to highlight those attributes that made the business special to begin with, and why me as a buyer was attracted to you and your organization at the outset. If I can continue to highlight those things going forward, and also show a track record of success in that endeavor from prior acquisitions, I think that's how you ultimately can work through that type of transition. And you're right, it also comes down to the seller acknowledging that there are a couple of different acquisition models out there, from the full integration, which Ntiva ascribed to much less integrated approaches that other organizations do, and try to ascertain where you as a seller would feel most comfortable. But I think at the end of the day, look, there's always going to be a period of transition, perhaps even a period of mourning, but being very aware to that, from an EQ perspective, I think is tremendously important to navigate through, and also just to have very clear expectations, goals, guidelines, involve lines of communication open to help through that transition period. I think that's ultimately where success can come from, both over the short and through to the long term.
Well, I got to tell you, when we're faced with it, I'm reminded of the great philosopher Mike Tyson when he says, everybody has a plan until they're hit in the mouth.
Sure, of course.
And we're getting better at it. Our expectations are much clearer, and we built out scope of works and things like that. But man, when that team's coming in and they're high energy, it's tough. So do you have a couple of examples of maybe where you were able to really retain the skills, and then maybe one where it just didn't work well? And what
Yeah,
lessons can we learn from that?
I think one of the so at Ntiva, up to date, we've done 16 acquisitions all told, all in the last 8 years, and the largest of which was the Purple Guys, that was
Hmm.
acquired in April of last year. So right about
Hmm.
a year ago, it was added kind of 2/3 to the top and bottom line for Ntiva. So very large compared to previous acquisitions. And so I think, for that business in particular, and the method by which we went about integration very successfully, I might add, it was really
Good.
just about the completeness of the approach to integration, the thoroughness, the engagement with leadership across the table, so that we were not just across the table, we were sitting beside each other at the table. That really helped underpin success and kind of buy-in up and down through the ranks of the organization. And going prior to that, you fed into the diligence and the learning efforts to understand who the key individuals were within the business, not just from a client relationship perspective, but from a culture carrying perspective within the organization, so that you could really focus efforts on engaging and exciting those individuals going through this transition. And I think where we have learned a tremendous amount from prior acquisitions
Mm.
was probably hewing a little too close to the formulaic playbook of integration, without being amenable to twists and turns in the approach that are needed as
Hmm.
client challenges come up, or key individuals are unsettled. And so that's where areas where we've learned a lot and we're able to apply those lessons reasonably successfully, fairly successfully with the Purple Guys and subsequent acquisitions that we've done.
Yeah, they were huge and they had a forward momentum of their own. And so you think about, wow, like how did this get done? So if you felt like that was successful, and by the way, I've had a great conversation with Kevin. He is tremendous. So with that kind of character at the helm, I can see, if he's got like-minded folks around him to help lead, I can see how they work towards a common goal with you guys. Yeah, but that's just huge. I mean, it just seems like a monstrosity of an undertaking. Did you
And
be, go ahead.
I was just look, it was, but at the same time, it wasn't as though it was a shotgun marriage put together in an
Okay,
instant. It was 3+ years of relationship building between
gotcha.
Kevin and Stephen, Ntiva's CEO, frankly, within the environment of the Evolve peer groups, where they first got to meet each other and be in the same
Interesting.
peer group to suss each other out,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of
Mm-hmm.
assess each other, the businesses, discuss potential fit, even consider strategic considerations as the respective businesses built
Right.
and grew over time, so that when the transaction itself took place, there was a lot of groundwork and foundation built, which ultimately helped as we move through things, because nothing is ever going to go perfectly. But if you've got
Mm-hmm.
that basis of rapport, trust, friendship, relationship, that helps being able to navigate through those unexpected or unforeseen scenarios that ultimately get you to a better outcome at the end of the day.
That's great because obviously my mind was headed towards due diligence period, which never seems to be long enough. So if they're getting to know each other over a period of time, but still two big organizations like that, how long was the due diligence period, and did you feel like it was long enough? And what are some goals you're trying to accomplish during that time?
Yeah, so with that transaction, it was a little bit different in that, because of the size of it and because the Purple Guys was private equity owned previously, they had run through a banker led process where it was, two-stage auction process, and lots of hoops to go through, and the diligence process itself was very condensed and compressed, certainly compared to other engagements and acquisitions that we've done, where it was just a direct engagement where you really have the time to ask all the questions that you might like to ask. And so, in a scenario like that, it was really about prioritizing that which was most important to us,
Okay.
really trying to understand the most important clients, the most impactful clients and individuals within the organization, and try to uncover any potential yellow or red flags, and
Right.
put all sorts of attention to those, rather than trying to understand, well, with as much detail, those guys pay on a biweekly basis versus
Right.
twice a
Yeah.
month. All that sort of stuff needs to be known, certainly from an integration perspective, but as far as gathering the conviction around your investment thesis,
Hmm.
you got to focus on the stuff that is going to be the needle mover in a
Right,
decision.
right. Okay, right. Yeah. Because what I've noticed is that, a lot of the smaller deals that we did, now that I'm learning, are named tuck-ins. While they were good acquisitions, the due diligence was brief at best and not so necessary because a lot, maybe the owners were exiting and the teams are coming in, and it didn't seem like it was a huge mountain to climb. We're busy for some time, but there was no doubt that they were going to integrate onto our tool set and stack
Mhm.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And I guess when it came up to this last acquisition that we did, I was thinking in my mind, diligence is really the financial performance, the fitness, the scope is really around that. Whereas really it's about everything else as well. We brought on the most employees, we're negotiating comp plans and pace. And you're right, there was a very different pay process there, and benefits, and the benefits package was completely different. But I found that there was almost too much optimism on our side. I've got to engage my team sooner and prompting with lists. And you guys have helped us tremendously. And I think it was Greg Northrup at IT Valuations already had some great checklists. And so I was kind of scrambling to look for some checklists, and okay, we've got to think outside the box. But I had no idea to the extent that both organizations were really looking for us to have things ironed out beforehand. But again, I don't know that that would have kept it from being feeling like you're in the ring with a prize fighter. So maybe speak to that a little bit, where maybe it wasn't a curated process like you have with the purple guys, but you're kind of driving that whole piece. And then in your role, if you could speak to your role in corporate development, I think that was interesting that I heard from Jason with Enteresis, that he was really still engaged in the integration or was responsible for that. Because it seems to me to be two different roles where you're in the hunt for companies, you're interviewing the teams, you want to bring them on, you want to get them involved. I think that I would be eager to stay involved to make sure that promises were met and people knew where things were. But did you have a hand in integration too? And is that a typical expectation?
Right. So I think every company does it a little bit differently. I think, from the earliest days at Ntiva, I was responsible for all the things across the M&A lifecycle, from the sourcing and origination to the diligence and then into the integration. And then about 2 or so years ago, one of the individuals that we had come from an acquired business actually stepped into an integration leadership role. And so I think what's critically important is, so much of the relationship building and frankly the day-to-day interaction every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, that's the level of frequency of contact that I'm having with the owner or the key individuals in a business. And it doesn't quite make sense in my mind to get to the day after close and suddenly say, okay, see you later. I'm gonna hand you off, and never see how it goes. And so, what we've been fortunate enough to do at Ntiva is, as we're in the diligence phase of things, particularly on the operational side of things, as we're getting informed and learning about what we need to be contemplating and considering from an integration perspective, our integration lead is involved in those conversations. He is directly learning those bits of information to help inform him, not just from an integration perspective, but also relationship building for him, because he'll be leading the steering committees, he'll be leading the conversations, he's leading the training sessions, he's leading the blocking and tackling efforts across the organization when the integration happens. And if he's got that personal rapport that he's developed before being in the thick of the integration, I think that helps tremendously. So he and I worked very hard on instituting as seamless of a transition as possible when we move from diligence phase to integration phase. And I stay involved on the integration phase from a steerco participation level, from an engagement with the former owners perspective, just to know that there may be some bits of information or some element of the diligence phase that needs to be heard or carried forward or reminded on. And so that's kind of the role that I play on the integration side. If it was 90% of my time is on deal close and earlier, 10% is on the integration side of things. But I think
Okay.
even with that little bit of overlap, it helps ensure
Mhm.
continuity through it, and know that the sellers that are coming on board, where there's lots of things changing for them and
Yeah.
for their team, that there isn't suddenly, I used to call CVC 3 times a day. Now who's this new guy that I need to talk to? Like, I don't know him. It helps avoid situations like that.
So give me a war story, where's something you missed or you thought it is a learning process, especially if you're telling me you're standing up these organizations or this process for these organizations, like, oh my gosh, why were we not thinking about this in that whole process?
I think one story in particular that I don't think is super unique to small businesses, I think it's actually can be fairly common, is being on top of all of the different tax related
Mm,
filings, requirements, solicitation of monies, the remittance of those to the appropriate authority in your state, in your city, in your town, in your county, having visibility to all of those sorts of things. And it's not necessarily big dollars in the grand scheme of things. It could potentially be for the organization that's selling. But we went through a process a couple of years ago, and we started to ask some questions of what we saw, some accounts on the balance sheet that we're just trying to uncover and unpick, and that kind of led us down a bit of a rabbit hole to understand how they had solicited tax proceeds from their clients, but then hadn't been as diligent in remitting those to the relevant authority. And so we needed to bring in some tax advisors to really get to the bottom of it, to really understand what our potential exposure could be to that. And so that kind of elongated the diligence process and required some structural changes to the transaction around escrows from a protection perspective. And
Mhm.
then, once the transaction itself occurred, then it was jumping straight into the rectification of those tax matters very quickly, so that we could ultimately understand the total size and magnitude of the tax liability that we faced, and frankly hoped that we escrowed sufficiently for, and then kind of move beyond that. But that was something that I don't think we had fully appreciated would be something that we'd be spending so much time on.
Mm.
But is now my antenna is up for understanding those sorts of things going forward. I could go on for days with other lessons. I'd say, another quick one just to say it is the
Yeah.
depth of relationship that the owner
Mhm.
has with their clients vis-a-vis others within the organization. And it can become particularly problematic if the owner is planning to sunset or retire or move off to other things. And if all the relationships are with that individual, it can be problematic from a retention perspective
Mm.
if that dynamic is not fully understood.
Interesting. Fascinating. Thank you. That's good insight. So, what's the state of the industry? Summarize
Ugh.
the last 5 years. We're ramping up out of COVID. What's going on? Got a new president. Tariffs.
It's hard to keep track on a day-to-day basis what's happening. I think the
Uh,
more macro trend is a dramatic acceleration in acquisition and M&A activity that's happening, whether it is among MSPs, whether it involves private equity owners or buyers looking to enter into the space, whether it is bootstrapped organizations, whether you are sponsor backed, whether you're big or small, just the velocity of activity has accelerated tremendously. I think what has happened more recently, perhaps in the last 6 to 12 months, is really a focus on quality of organizations and how that has impacted valuations. So if you are hitting on five, six, seven, eight of those value drivers that you mentioned earlier from Linda Rose, you have the ability to command a relative premium on the value of a business vis-a-vis another business that may be more mediocre at certain of those parameters. And it can become much more pronounced as businesses get larger and larger, that the gap between a top tier MSP and the multiple that they can enjoy versus one that may be more middling in their success, that gap really starts to widen out. And I think it's also, given the level of familiarity, education, awareness to M&A that is happening, there is a real need for individuals, business owners, to be smart or become smarter on the elements of their business, like those value drivers that can help bring material value to their organization. It's hard to say exactly where things are going to go over the forthcoming months. I think there have been some big acquisition markers in our space within the last 3 or 4 months that is influencing and likely to influence subsequent activity. But then you've got interest rates remaining at a relatively elevated level, which can constrain abilities to do acquisitions at elevated prices because your cost of capital, your cost of debt is higher. So I think good quality businesses will continue to get great prices, but it remains to be seen exactly how to play out. It's still a critical industry. People need the services and the capabilities, and who knows how AI and other transformative type capabilities will continue to play out in the space. But continue to watch, continue to stay in and involved, and talk to smart people to try to help get you informed on what is happening and what is impactful.
so continuing along that value maximizer theme we have, you just mentioned that sometimes the owners are not, creating as valuable as a business they can. What was the most common thing that you saw or that you're hearing about that they're not working on that they should?
Look, you talked about it earlier, whereby a lot of businesses out there are lifestyle organizations where they have a fairly stable set of clients that are growing at a reasonable rate, but not pushing too hard. A fairly stable base of employees, so they're progressing, but you're clipping coupons on a regular basis to choose one way to approach it. And so I think about if you're a business owner, and as you think about the eventual transition of your business. And Arlen Sorensen likes to say, 100% of businesses will transition. Do you want to do it while you're vertical or while you're horizontal? If you want to do it while you're vertical, you need to inject some intentionality into how you
Mm,
approach that decision. And one of the big ones to think about is owner-led sales and account management, particularly on the sales side of things, because organic growth of a business is a great way to present yourself as highly attractive to potential suitors. And if all or the vast majority of your sales engine is tied up with the CEO of the business, and that CEO is planning to retire following transaction, that can be a massive risk factor because that buyer will have concerns about the go forward capability for that organic growth to continue at that same clip going forward. And so being able to diversify away from the owner, essentially to get you out of your job while you're still in your role, can be very successful as far as giving you the ability to have as many options and flexibility out there for you when you do ultimately transact on the business. So that's definitely the biggest one out there that you see. It's very common. It's not unusual by any stretch, but it's the one that more mature organizations have been able to diversify away from owner-led sales, and that can be a real mark of differentiation for yourself vis-a-vis the sea of businesses out there that are also potentially being considered for acquisition.
yeah, and if you think about it, it's understandable. Most organizations are started by someone with a skill. So whether you're baking pies, or if you're fixing computers, it's usually the skill. So we love doing that skill, right? We love operating. So thinking about scale is very different. And it's just really interesting as we've gone through our acquisitions. And what I love about Evolve is it really puts a nice framework in place. At least we have a common language we can speak about, like operational maturity level, service leadership. And Peter Kajawa has done such an amazing job injecting a lot of intellectual thought into what does that look like for a managed IT service provider. And that's just super helpful. I mean, it's really, really helpful to understand, oh my gosh, okay, these are my blind spots. All the tools they've been incredible for us. So you can kind of have a better idea of what levers to pull and how to take that growth forward. So
Right. Right.
that's
And that and
good.
that's why you see so many acquisitions having taken place between organizations within the Evolve ecosystem because
Mm-hmm.
they speak that common language, they have that
Mm-hmm.
common parlance, they have gotten to know very well a peer group member across the table
Mm-hmm.
from them that they've met on a quarterly basis for several years, and it can build a lot of that trust and rapport as you think about taking the next step in a relationship between organizations. That helps. It's a very fertile breeding ground for
Mm-hmm.
acquisitions
It
within the
is.
space.
But I also feel like, as we gain experience, this was our eighth acquisition last December. We're looking for more mature organizations now. We don't want to try to fix something. We don't want to, we're treating it like an interview. Like, what unique skills do they bring? But staying in the lanes. It's odd, right? So you're looking, and every owner is unique, I'm finding. They're all unique. They bring a unique skill set. So their business will have kind of a unique value to it. But yeah, the ones that are pushing, right? They're pushing to grow, they're pushing for good profitability, they're developing their leaders. Even if it's no matter what size of the scale it is from a revenue perspective, you're looking for organizations that have a mindset towards developing quality and a high operational maturity level, a high OML. And I had heard it in one of these seminars that as you're acquiring, you don't want to either be acquired by or acquire another organization that is more than zero point 0.5 or 1 point above you or below you in
Yeah,
OML. And that was a lot of wisdom in that.
it's funny you said that. It was literally if you weren't going to mention that, that was the point that I was going to make, because you don't want to have two businesses that are too far apart because you've either got one that's kind of being dragged down and one that's not set up to be able to be pulled ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of it differently, if you've got two very different organizations culturally, even cross country wise. I think back to my experience a couple of years ago prior to joining Ntiva. It was Northern Virginia, US-based company that had acquired a Israeli slash Luxembourgian company. And the cultural challenges between the two organizations were very hard to get beyond. And it was kind of a bridge too far. And what's
Hmm.
interestingly happened is that after I left that organization, they themselves were sold. And then the new owners of the business, the new kind of consortium private equity owner, actually broke the business back apart.
Wow.
So, those things really do matter. Within the lens of the MSP world,
Hmm.
certainly OML is tremendously important to have that kind of
Hmm.
visibility to that so that you ultimately don't set yourself up for failure if
Hmm.
you go after buying a business that is too far down the line from where you stand as an OML ranking.
And as I've listened in business, over the last 30 or 40 years of working, right? You hear about acquisitions and some of the, if I'm listening in to whatever I'm, example that I'm hearing about, they talked about, don't try to fix a culture. So when I think of a poor culture, I think of just shenanigans. I think of people just doing ridiculous things. I mean, just I don't even know, not a high moral value or whatever, just a lot of garbage going on that you can't fix it, or there's a sinking ship. You have to be very careful. Maybe they're into bankruptcy, not profitable for various reasons. But what I have found through the acquisitions we've done, Chris, is that culture flows through to the customers too.
Yes.
So you're very much attracting like for like, and you've got to be super careful. So even when you get above broken organizations or broken situations and you get into more mature organizations, there's still so much more above that you can achieve for and grow an appetite for. And so it's exciting for us to feel like that we've accomplished so much in the last 4 or 5 years, especially the last year and a half since we've been involved, that it is really changing the mindset here of what we're looking for and what we want to do, what we're willing to be involved in. And it's just, I got to tell you, it's just hugely rewarding.
But yeah, it really can be. I think if you can effectively define the key attributes of a business, obviously it's easier to determine if business is a sinking ship or going through bankruptcy. I think the more nuanced approach, or those that have a little bit more subtlety involved, is if you have a leader and an organization that kind of puts the employee and or the client first at the list from a prioritization perspective versus an organization that's really about to continually drive money first, drive the upsell first, drive the dollars to the bottom line first. They can both look like high performing, well performing organizations, but that subtle difference in engagement with clients or rewarding of employees can drive different behaviors of
Hmm.
individuals. And if those are different from how you strive to operate your business, that can be very problematic for an acquisition. It may not show up as overtly in an OML screen or anything like
Yeah,
that, but
right.
if you talk to the owner and understand what their motivations are with the business, what they intend to do with the sale, what they intend to do after the transaction, how they look after or don't look after their team, that can be quite revealing before you even get a chance to hear it from the clients themselves.
Man, you aren't kidding. And so that just goes back to the time spent. So like you were saying before, well, hey, I was on the phone with Chris for, I don't know, 3, 4 times a day. And sometimes, and I guess it's just kind of like a sales process. You need to qualify where you're spending your time. Is this a good candidate? Is this anything, whether you're bringing on a new client through organizational growth, I'm sorry, through organic growth, or you're spending time with a potential acquisition. And, it's just so interesting again, too. Man, if I'm not having fun and it's not a natural conversation,
Yeah.
I'm working too hard here. It might not be a good fit, and they probably think the same thing. And we have a very huge investment in the team. Listening to you, we've started a learning academy. We have gone from, probably like a not very disciplined performance review process to now it's biannual with a quarterly check-in. And there are specific questions that we expect of a manager to ask an employee. And then the work that you see that you've got to do to bring that new team in to that culture, it's a lot of work. But it was the thing that they were excited about when you were talking and you got together over that year or two that you were dancing, but then you've got to deliver. So a lot of different points there, but the more you're at it, the more you realize you're going to be at it and even deeper. And I've heard people talk, well, I'm nervous, I don't know. I've heard John sold his business and now he's working more than he's ever worked. And I thought, well, maybe he wasn't working much before. I mean, at this point, everybody only has so many hours in the day. So maybe he's doing different things that he should have been doing before.
Or things
So,
that
and
or
then,
things that he likes doing, and so is comfortable
right.
spending more time doing it.
Right. So it's coaching big time. It's all coaching. And then how much time are you willing to spend with your team to coach them? And what I'm finding is the more that we do that, the more that I do that, the more that I lead by example, the more they're willing to do it with their teams. And and then you see things happening organically on its own, which are just phenomenal. You
Yeah.
see events and people doing things and having fun. And so anyway, it can be very rewarding. So, because it's a balance, right? So you're trying to grow, whether you're doing organic growth or acquisition growth, there are value drivers. Well, what is value drivers? It's a higher valuation, so we can all be rewarded financially. At the same time, we have to keep those values that are people values, that are growth values, that are personal satisfaction of how I get things out of having a wonderful family and a happy marriage. We have to nurture those things along the journey. I find that the acquisition piece is just a piece, but then once that's done, hey, you're all in the same boat together. So you
Right.
better have chosen well.
Yeah, and I think as you do so, it's providing opportunities for the newly incoming team or individuals to provide their feedback or perspective, or kind of highlight what is good about them, and maybe there are unique things that they do that can be applied out to the whole organization at Big Sur. Or
Yeah.
even if you get into I'll call it, quote, professionalizing the talent development within the organization. There's 360 type reviews where you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
go up the level, or you can do skip level conversations
Mm.
to kind of help either reinforce the good, or unlock opportunities, or reveal potential challenges that could be missed as things kind of go up the levels or down the levels through the organization. All those sorts of things can be helpful to make sure that what you're trying to put out into the world is done in the manner in which you're striving to do.
So what's the one thing, as you saw, you got 5 years experience working with MSPs. Like I said, I'm just going to keep going back to this topic. What's the one thing that an owner can do to add value? And maybe it's not an activity, but maybe it's an organization they join, or it's a mindset. What's the one thing that you saw that helped drive value into the organization, especially around the M&A process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad topic, but I would
Mm-hmm.
call it intentionality.
Okay. I like
Intentionality, and that
that.
feeds into preparation, and that can take a whole host of different forms.
Yes.
To the 8 value drivers that we talked about towards the outset of our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But being on top of those sorts of efforts
Mm-hmm.
is really important. So even if you're running a lifestyle business,
Mm-hmm.
quote, you can still seek to inject the right way you want to do things through that organization, even if that's the approach that you're taking. And I think with the sophistication of buyers out there, and frankly sophistication of other potential sellers out there, if you've got yourself intentionally minded for what you want to do after transaction, what gives you the most joy and fulfills your passion, having a clear sense of that, as well as the preparatory elements, from the financial books to the client relationships to the retention efforts to the talent development frameworks that you utilize. That sort of preparation, that sort of intentionality is going to get you to exactly where you want to go, whether that's a specific dollar in mind that you have as a goal, a specific role you want to take on board, specific opportunities you want to provide to your team or to your clients. All that comes down to your ability to inject preparation and intentionality into the work that you're doing.
Or legacy.
Yes,
We've heard about
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
People remember you for where you put in your effort or your intentionality. That's so good, Chris. That's so good. So you're off on a new venture. We're gonna miss you in Chicago, man. We're gonna miss you the rest of the year.
I know. It's bittersweet. Over these last 6-7 years or so, in the corporate development world, I've been able to develop this unique capability to help organizations that are newly private equity backed stand stand up their M&A corporate development integration engine. And an opportunity in a new sector, the industrial automation software space, came up to work with an organization and a leadership team that was just acquired in December of last year, and kind of help be a seasoned vet, so to speak, in the room and build up the capabilities at that organization. Just saw it as a challenge, but also an opportunity to take hold and bring some great impact to a unique and great business. And so, my connection and, I suppose, tentacles into the MSP world, I hope they remain in place for many years to come. Developed fantastic relationships across the industry, including with individuals just like yourself, Sam. And so I have a keen interest in seeing continued success for Ntiva and others in the space to get out the great outcomes that they're hoping for and driving towards, while also taking on this new challenge and kind of helping to share the wisdom and expertise and perspective that I've learned over the years to a new set of individuals and a new organization.
That's awesome. So one last question. How many individual relationships were you building for
Oh,
Ntiva?
the number of conversations and emails sent over those last weeks in the role was quite voluminous.
I bet.
And I think, upon reflection, it was kind of rewarding and heartening to see the measure of meaningful conversations and depth of relationships that I've built over the years kind of come to a measure of fruition. And I look forward to seeing, as I said, continued success for yourself, Sam, and for others
Thanks.
that I've spoken with, because you're trying to go about building your business and developing your people and serving your clients in the quote right way. And that's something that we had ascribed to at Ntiva, and it's heartening to see others do the same sort of thing, and wish to see only great success off the back of those efforts.
Thank you, man. Well, I appreciate it. Best of luck to you. You definitely got my cell phone number, so let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Watch out.
Right? It's all right.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Well,
Well,
I'll talk to you soon, Sam.
have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks,
See ya.
Chris.